Live at the White House. Caitlin, we heard Levitt address this meeting at the White House that's expected to happen today. It does include Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. What have you learned about it?
Brianna, two things stood out to me from that briefing. Obviously, Caroline Levitt was saying that they believe these emails prove that President Trump did nothing wrong. Obviously, he isn't accused of any wrongdoing. We made that clear.
It is not a coincidence that the Democrats leaked these emails to the fake news this morning ahead of Republicans reopening the government.
Why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please? Doesn't that show our level of transparency?
White House just out with a new blistering response for Democrats after they released emails written by Jeffrey Epstein that referenced President Trump. Here's Press Secretary Caroline Levitt.
Okay, so here we go. Again, just when you think the Trump drama has hit its peak, just when you think there's no way this story can get any bigger, boom, the floodgates open and we're drowning in documents. I'm talking thousands of pages, sealed files, White House records, special counsel reports, all of it dumped into the public eye in the last 48 hours. And look, I know what you're thinking. Another Trump scandal, right? Another Friday news dump that everyone will forget by Monday. Yeah, except this time it's different. This time we've got over 20,000 documents connecting Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. We've got the special counsel saying in writing that Trump engaged in an unprecedented criminal effort to overturn an election. We've got emails. We've got communications. We've got stuff that was supposed to stay buried forever. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And there's no indication that President Trump did anything illegal, but his association with Epstein is what it is. And he needs to get in front of this story instead of letting this define him, because he's sitting back and there's just a constant drip of information that makes him look bad and makes his supporters wonder what's going on. And that demand for the release of the files ain't stopping anytime soon. It's just going to increase.
Can you believe this? Like, actually take a second and think about what's happening here. These are files that powerful people fought to keep sealed. Files that were locked away behind court orders and executive privilege claims. And now they're just out there for anyone to read. Your neighbor can read them. I can read them. You can read them. That's wild. So here's the thing. Trump is already melting down on social media. His allies are screaming about political persecution. They're calling this a witch hunt, a hoax, another Democratic conspiracy to take down the president. And yeah, his supporters are eating that up. But the documents don't lie. You know, you can't just tweet your way out of thousands of pages of evidence. Let me paint the picture for you. It's November 2025. Trump is in his second term. He's supposed to be focused on governing, right? Running the country, dealing with actual presidential stuff. Instead, he's spending his Friday having a complete meltdown online because these files just expose connections he's been denying for years. The timing is insane. The optics are terrible. And the content, oh man, the content is even worse. We're talking about documents that show Trump was described as, and I'm quoting here, a fixation for Epstein. A fixation. Let that word sink in for a second. Not just a casual acquaintance. Not just someone who showed up at the same parties occasionally. A fixation. The files are using that exact word to describe Trump's relationship with one of the most notorious criminals in modern American history. And then there's the special counsel stuff. Jack Smith, you know, the guy who's been investigating Trump for what feels like forever. His January 2025 report is now public. Full transparency. And what does it say? That Trump engaged in an unprecedented criminal effort to overturn legitimate election results. That he tried to use the power of the United States government to stay in office. This isn't speculation. This isn't anonymous sources. This is the official report from a federal special counsel. Come on. How are we even here right now? How is this the reality we're living in? A sitting president with thousands of documents tying him to a convicted sex trafficker and a special counsel report accusing him of trying to overthrow an election. And we're just supposed to go about our day like this is normal? Like this is fine? Like this is fine? The craziest part, and I mean truly the most bonkers aspect of this whole thing, is that Trump's response has been exactly what you'd expect. Instead of addressing the allegations, instead of explaining the connections, instead of showing even a shred of accountability, he goes on the attack. He's calling it a hoax. He's blaming Democrats. He's probably blaming the deep state and the fake news media and whoever else he can think of. It's the same playbook he always uses. Deny, deflect, attack. But here's what's different this time. The evidence is public now. We're not relying on leaks or unnamed sources or investigative reporting that people can dismiss as biased. These are official government documents, court filings, special counsel reports, email records, the kind of stuff that holds up in court, the kind of stuff that's really hard to spin away. And Congress is already reacting. Lawmakers are demanding full transparency. Survivors of Epstein's crimes are demanding justice. Former federal prosecutors are going on record saying Trump should release everything. Every person, every document connected to the Epstein case. The pressure is building from all sides. This isn't just coming from Democrats either. There are voices from across the political spectrum saying we deserve answers. So where does this go from here? What happens when you have a president facing this level of scrutiny with this much evidence now sitting in the public domain? And everyone can see what was being hidden. What happens when the special counsel's findings are laid bare for the whole country to examine? That's what we're going to break down today. We're going to dig into these documents, understand what they actually say, and figure out why this matters so much more than just another Trump controversy. Because trust me, this one's different. This one might actually stick. This one has the kind of evidence that's hard to ignore, hard to dismiss, hard to just sweep under the rug and pretend never happened. All right, let's get into the actual substance here because there's a lot to unpack and most people are getting this story completely wrong. They're either dismissing it as partisan noise or they're treating it like it's already a done deal that's going to take Trump down. And look, the truth is somewhere in the middle, but it's way more complicated than either side wants to admit. So first things first, what exactly got released and why now? These aren't random leaks. We're talking about coordinated document dumps from multiple sources. You've got White House files that were sealed under executive privilege claims. You've got special counsel materials that were restricted during active investigations. You've got court documents from the Epstein case that victims and their lawyers have been fighting to make public for years. The timing is connected to ongoing legal battles and congressional pressure. Lawmakers, particularly those who've been pushing for transparency around the Epstein case, finally got enough momentum to force these releases. Victims' advocates argued that keeping this stuff sealed was protecting powerful people at the expense of justice, and apparently enough judges and officials agreed to start opening the vaults. Now the Epstein connection, this is where things get really messy. The newly released files include over 20,000 documents showing communications and connections between Epstein and various high-profile figures. Trump's name shows up repeatedly, and we're not just talking about party guest lists or casual social connections. According to the files, Epstein allegedly described Trump as a fixation. There are emails, there are phone records, there's evidence of a relationship that went way beyond what Trump has publicly acknowledged. Trump's defense, predictably, is that he barely knew Epstein, that they ran in the same social circles in New York and Florida but weren't close, that he actually banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago years ago because of inappropriate behavior. And yeah, there's some truth to parts of that, but the documents are painting a much more complex picture. They're showing ongoing contact. They're showing instances where Trump and Epstein were coordinating on various matters. It's uncomfortable stuff, and here's where the political calculation gets interesting. Trump's team is betting that they can frame this as a hit job. They're saying Democrats only care about Epstein connections when it involves Trump, but they're silent about other powerful people in those same documents. And you know what? They're not entirely wrong about that. There are plenty of prominent figures from both parties who had Epstein connections, but Trump happens to be the sitting president. So yeah, the scrutiny is going to be more intense. Then we've got the special counsel report. Jack Smith's January 2025 findings are now fully public, and they are damning. The report explicitly states that Trump engaged in an unprecedented criminal effort to overturn the legitimate results of the election. It details attempts to use government power to remain in office. It outlines a pattern of behavior that Smith argues meets the threshold for criminal charges. The report covers the fake elector scheme. It covers pressure on state officials. It covers the events leading up to January 6th. It's hundreds of pages of detailed findings, witness testimony, documentary evidence. This is the kind of thing that prosecutors dream about having in a case. The level of detail is staggering. We're talking about reconstructed timelines, phone records, text messages, witness statements from inside the White House. But, and this is a huge but, Trump is still president. He's in office right now. And that creates all kinds of legal complications. You can't just indict a sitting president the way you would a regular citizen. There's the whole Department of Justice policy about not prosecuting sitting presidents. There's the question of whether this should go through impeachment instead of criminal courts. There's political reality to consider. So what you've got is this bizarre situation where there's a public special counsel report saying the president committed crimes, but the mechanisms to actually hold him accountable are tied up in constitutional questions and political gridlock. It's maddening if you think about it. Like, if this evidence existed about literally anyone else, they'd already be facing charges. But because it's the president, we're in this weird legal limbo, and Trump knows this. His whole strategy is to run out the clock, to tie everything up in appeals and motions and delays until either public attention moves on or he can claim vindication because he finished his term without being formally charged. It's cynical, but it's probably going to work, at least partially. Now let's talk about the obstruction angle, because that's actually where some of the most explosive new information is coming from. The documents suggest that Trump and his associates may have attempted to interfere with congressional certification processes. There are emails showing coordination between White House officials and outside allies about strategies to delay or disrupt the certification. There are communications that appear to show advanced knowledge of plans to challenge the results. This stuff is particularly significant because it goes beyond just speech or political advocacy. If prosecutors can prove that there was an actual coordinated effort to obstruct an official government proceeding, that's a clear-cut crime. That's not a gray area. That's not protected political speech. That's potentially criminal conspiracy. The documents also reveal how much Trump's team knew about the lack of evidence for widespread fraud claims. Internal communications show advisors telling Trump that the fraud allegations wouldn't hold up in court, that recounts had confirmed the results, that their own investigations weren't finding proof of the claims they were making publicly, and Trump apparently pushed forward anyway. That's really important from a legal standpoint because it speaks to intent. If you genuinely believe an election was stolen and you're acting on that belief, even if you're wrong, that's different from knowing you lost and trying to overturn it anyway. These documents suggest Trump was repeatedly told by his own people that he lost legitimately and chose to ignore that. Are you kidding me? Like, this is the sitting president of the United States we're talking about. And we now have documents showing he was told he lost, told the fraud claims were baseless, and still tried to overturn the results. That's not being mistaken. That's not being stubborn. That's potentially criminal. But here's where public perception gets tricky. Trump supporters aren't reading these documents. They're hearing Trump's version of events. They're hearing that this is all a setup, a deep state conspiracy, politically motivated prosecution. And nothing in these documents is going to change their minds because they've already decided the system is corrupt and out to get him. Meanwhile, Trump's opponents are looking at the same documents and seeing clear evidence of criminal behavior that should immediately disqualify him from office. And nothing Trump says is going to change their minds because they've already decided he's guilty. The people in the middle, the ones who might actually be persuaded by evidence, they're drowning in information. There's too much to process. The stories are too complex. The legal arguments are too technical. So they're probably just tuning it out and waiting to see what happens next election. That's the frustrating reality of where we are. We have unprecedented transparency. We have more documentary evidence than any previous presidential scandal. And somehow it still might their side. The documents keep coming too. More files are being unsealed every few days as various legal holds expire or judges rule on disclosure motions. Each new batch brings fresh revelations. Sometimes it's minor stuff that confirms what we already suspected. Sometimes it's bombshells that open entirely new lines of inquiry. What we're seeing is the intersection of multiple investigations and legal battles all coming to a head at once. The Epstein stuff, the election interference stuff, the classified documents cases, the financial investigations. It's all happening simultaneously, and the documentary record is becoming public in real time. This creates a situation where even people who follow politics closely are struggling to keep track of which revelation belongs to which investigation. Okay, so let's actually break this down into what matters and what it all means going forward, because we can't just drown in documents without understanding the bigger picture. Point 1, the scale of the documentary evidence. We're talking about over 20,000 documents in just the Epstein-related materials alone. Then you add in the special counsel reports, the White House files, the court records. You're looking at potentially hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence now in the public domain. That's not normal. That level of transparency into presidential conduct and high-level political operations is basically unprecedented in American history. And yeah, most people aren't going to read all those documents. That's obvious. But journalists will, researchers will, opposition campaigns will, future historians definitely will. The information is out there now, and it can't be put back in the box. That matters even if the immediate political impact is limited. We're creating a permanent record of this presidency that future generations will study and judge. Point 2, the legal jeopardy Trump is facing isn't theoretical anymore. The Special Counsel's report lays out what Smith believes is a criminal case. We're not talking about impeachable offenses or political misconduct. We're talking about actual crimes, conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding, potentially other charges, depending on how prosecutors interpret the evidence. Now, whether Trump actually gets charged is a different question. The political and legal complications are massive, but the foundation for prosecution exists now in a way it didn't before. And if Trump ever stops being president, if he leaves office for any reason, those legal threats don't disappear. Future administrations could pursue charges based on this evidence. That's going to hang over everything he does for the rest of his presidency and beyond. Point 3. The Epstein connection is probably the most politically damaging part of this whole mess, even though it might not be the most legally serious. Americans can sometimes rationalize political corruption or even election interference as just politicians being politicians, but association with Epstein, with a convicted sex trafficker, with someone who hurt kids, that's different. That hits different. People have a visceral reaction to that. Trump's denials and deflections don't work as well when there are documents showing repeated contact and communication, when Epstein allegedly described Trump as a fixation, when the relationship clearly went beyond casual acquaintance. It creates an image problem that's really hard to fix. And in politics, image problems can be just as damaging as legal problems, maybe even more damaging because they affect how regular voters perceive you. Point 4, and this is crucial. The timing of these releases matters enormously. This isn't happening during an election campaign when Trump could argue it's just opposition research being leaked. This is happening during his second term when he's supposed to be governing. It makes the whole administration look chaotic. It raises questions about what else might be hidden. It gives his opponents ammunition for future races and investigations. Plus, coming this late in his presidency, Trump has less time to spin the narrative or let it blow over. If this had dropped in year 1 of his term, he'd have years to rebuild and move past it. Dropping now is going to dominate coverage for the rest of his time in office. Every decision he makes, every policy he pushes, every appointment he tries to confirm, it's all going to be viewed through the lens of these revelations. So what actually happens next? Well, Congress is going to investigate. That's guaranteed. You're going to have hearings. You're going to have subpoenas. Democrats will push for accountability. Republicans will defend Trump and claim it's all partisan attacks. We've seen this movie before. The question is whether this time the evidence is strong enough to break through the partisan gridlock. The criminal investigation side is murkier. Jack Smith's report is public, but he's not going to indict a sitting president. That violates DOJ policy. So any actual criminal charges would have to wait until Trump leaves office. And by then, who knows what the political landscape looks like, or whether there's even appetite to prosecute a former president. We've never successfully prosecuted a former president for crimes committed while in office. That's uncharted territory. The Epstein files are going to keep generating headlines. More survivors might come forward. More connections might be revealed. This isn't a one-day story. It's going to be drip, drip, drip for months. Every few weeks, there'll be a new batch of documents or a new revelation, and the cycle starts again. That constant drumbeat of negative news is hard for any politician to overcome. Trump's strategy is pretty clear. Deny everything. Attack the investigators. Claim it's all politically motivated. Rally his base around the idea that he's being persecuted by corrupt elites. And honestly, that'll probably work with his core supporters. They're not going to abandon him over this. If anything, they'll dig in harder. They'll see the document releases as proof that the establishment is threatened by Trump. But independent voters, suburban moderates, people who maybe voted for Trump but aren't part of the cult of personality, this stuff matters to them. Seeing documentary evidence of connections Trump denied, reading a special counsel report detailing criminal conduct, that might move the needle. That might be the thing that makes them reconsider their support. The broader implication here is about accountability and transparency in government. We're seeing what happens when sealed documents get unsealed, when investigations become public, when the normal mechanisms for keeping things quiet break down. And it's chaotic, yeah, but it's also kind of amazing from a civic perspective. This is what open government is supposed to look like. Messy, uncomfortable, but ultimately transparent. Of course, Trump and his allies are going to use this to argue that the system is weaponized against them, that releasing these documents is itself a political act designed to damage him. And there's probably some truth to that. Timing is never accidental in politics. The decision to unseal these particular documents at this particular moment was made by people with agendas. But that doesn't change what's in the documents. The evidence is the evidence regardless of why or when it became public. Looking ahead, This sets a precedent for future transparency battles. If Congress and courts were willing to unseal this much material about a sitting president, what else might become public down the line? What other sealed files might get opened? It's going to make politicians and powerful people a lot more nervous about what they put in writing. Future administrations are going to be way more careful about creating documentary records. The reality is, we're living through a stress test of American institutions. Can the system handle a president credibly accused of criminal conduct? Can courts remain independent when they're ruling on cases involving the most powerful person in government? Can Congress conduct oversight when it's deeply divided along partisan lines? Can the public process this much information and make informed decisions? Can the media cover these stories in a way that informs rather than just inflames? We don't have answers to those questions yet. We're watching it play out in real time. These document releases are just one chapter in a much longer story about accountability, power, and whether our system of checks and balances actually works when it's tested to its limits. For now, the files are public. The evidence is available. What happens next depends on whether enough people care to do something about it, whether prosecutors are willing to act, whether Congress is willing to investigate seriously, whether voters factor this into their future decisions, whether the media continues to cover it or moves on to the next shiny object. This is wild. Can you believe we're actually here? A sitting president with thousands of documents tying him to Epstein and a special counsel report calling his conduct criminal, and we're all just living through it like it's another day, like this is normal, like we haven't completely lost the plot about what acceptable behavior looks like for someone holding the highest office in the land. But hey, at least the truth is out there now. At least we know. At least the documents are public, and anyone who wants to can read them and draw their own conclusions. And sometimes that's where change starts. Sometimes transparency is the first step toward accountability. Sometimes sunlight really is the best disinfectant. The question is whether we're going to do anything with this information or whether it just becomes more noise in an already deafening political environment. Whether these revelations actually matter or whether we've become so numb to scandal that nothing shocks us anymore. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. More documents are coming, more revelations are pending, and the political fallout is just getting started.